Welcome, welcome everyone to OCTIA's Cleantech Week at the Park. Before I start, let me acknowledge that I'm joining you today from Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. Here with me on the panel, I have Tyler Hamilton so far. Tyler is Director Ecosystem Development Cleantech at Mars Discovery District, and Tyler will be moderating this fireside chat. We will be joined at 2:30 today by our guest, the Honorable Ross Romano, our Minister of Government and Consumer Services. So we have a little bit of time, and I'll give you a bit of an overview of the program throughout the week. So at 3 p.m. today, right after the fireside chat with Minister Romano, we'll be transitioning to the opposition with a fireside chat with Lucie Collard, who's the Liberal MPP for Ottawa-Vanier and critic for the environment, conservation and parks. And tomorrow we'll start bright and early with a fireside chat with Minister Piccini, our Minister of Environment, Conservation and Parks, followed by a fireside chat with Parliamentary Assistant Dave Smith. Dave Smith is the Parliamentary Assistant to the Minister of Northern Development, Mines, Natural Resources and Forestry, and he's the MPP for Peterborough McArthur. So shout out to our friends at Cleantech Commons here. We have our guy, your guy, tomorrow. So on Wednesday morning, we will continue with the NDP's Environment and Climate critic, Peter Tabbins. And on Thursday, we're going to end the week on a high note with a fireside chat with the leaders, actually the leader duo of Ontario's Green Party, Mike Schreiner and Diane Sachs. So if you haven't registered yet, we have many interesting talks on the program. So please do so, register. It'll be interesting. I would also like to thank our sponsors and partners, gold sponsor RxN Reaction Hub, which is a creation of or spin-off of Kingston Process Metallurgy. They have other partners on board. They are creating a ChemTech commercialization hub, so stay tuned for that. Thank you also to our silver sponsor Mitex and our bronze sponsor Drystill. And I would also like to thank our partners who have helped us promote the event: Canada Cleantech Alliance, Cleantech North, CSI Climate Ventures, Energy Storage Canada, and the Ontario Sustainable Energy Association, OCTIA. We have a little bit more time, so maybe a few words on what we're doing this spring after Cleantech Week at the Park. We're launching a new program with IRAP for companies with circular economy solutions. So it's building on Hydrogen Connect. It's basically the same thing. We will be connecting Cleantech Ventures with engineering consultants, and companies are eligible to up to $25,000 for their work with the engineering consultant. And in early May, we're wrapping up Hydrogen Connect, and we'll have a showcase with the participants in the program and potential adopters. So look out for Enbridge, Natural Gas Innovation Fund, and the likes. And yeah, with that, I think I'll hand over to Tyler. And for those of you who don't know Tyler, it's probably not many of you, Tyler is Director of Cleantech at Mars Discovery District and responsible for building a network of investors, innovation organizations, and government agencies that can help Canadian Cleantech Ventures raise capital and scale globally. He also leads the Mission from Mars Climate Impact Challenge program And previous to Mars, Tyler spent 2 decades as a business and technology journalist and wrote extensively about Canada's clean technology sector and global climate tech trends. With that, I'll hand over to Tyler. I do think the minister has not yet arrived. Maybe Tyler, we can talk a little bit more about OCTIA and about Cleantech to bridge that gap. This is a good opportunity for a little bit of an OCTIA pitch. Where do you see the advantages for clean tech companies to join the association you are a board director of?
What are the advantages? Well, I think OCTIA is a terrific representative of the sector and the needs of the sector in Ontario. The ability to engage with key organizations as well as government to represent the interests of clean tech is super important. And I think the Ontario ecosystem in particular is very well positioned to really succeed on the global stage. But part of that success requires support at home. And part of the discussion that we're going to have with the minister is going to be about how the Ontario government can support the sector here at home. Obviously, in my role at Mars, and I am going to introduce myself just briefly again, is to represent ventures kind of at the earlier stage of development. OCTIA is a broader organization that represents the broader interests of the sector, but there's a lot of important crossover. So I'm very, very curious to get the minister's feedback today, on how the Ontario government is planning to engage the sector and make it easier for the Ontario government to become a customer, as well as municipalities within the region to become customers of a very innovative group of clean tech companies that we have here in the province.
Yeah, so this domestic support is very important. As you mentioned, that Ontario is very strong in terms of clean tech. I think we are probably the strongest province. If you mention,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, from a pure numbers of companies perspective and representation of GDP around clean tech. Now, it depends on your definition of clean tech and how broadly you define it. But I think generally, just because of our sheer size and our importance from an industrial perspective and manufacturing perspective, Ontario is and will remain one of the anchor players in Canada. I just came back from a trip overseas. I was in Scotland last week at a clean tech event, and it was good to see most of the Canadian companies that were there were from Ontario, and they were getting lots of attention and traction from European investors and corporates. So I think our brand is strong internationally. I think we need to leverage that and to do a better job of showing that we can adopt and promote the technologies at home. Because as you know, when it comes to procurement, if you're trying to sell overseas and a company gets asked, like, point to us what you're doing at home, what customers do you have at home, and if they say, well, actually, no one wants to adopt or deploy us at home, then it makes it harder to sell overseas.
It's a very important market signal there that governments can set. Hopefully we can shape some awareness about that here in Ontario and get the Ontario government or the next government, who knows, to do a bit more in terms of clean tech procurement. Did you get some insight as to what specifically the UK are doing in terms of government procurement, or are there maybe best practices?
There wasn't a lot of talk. It wasn't that kind of conference. It wasn't focused on procurement. It was, I did lead a presentation, a discussion around the comparing the electricity system in the UK and the whole market there versus Canada as a whole. It was interesting though, because when you start trying to tell the story of the Canadian electricity market overseas and you start kind of breaking it down, you're like, there's a lot of weird things about our market, right? That you have to, you need to explain to people that we use the word hydro to talk about our electricity rates and prices in the system. And there, hydro is like, well, it's just water, it's just electricity, it's water, right? But because of the history in Canada and Ontario specifically, we use that term. And what they didn't understand too is how jurisdiction for the electricity system is in the Constitution is broken up by province, and each province is very, very different, with some crown corporations and being vertically integrated, like you see in BC and Manitoba and Quebec and also Newfoundland as an example. And then you've got Ontario, which is a bit of a hybrid system where you've got OPG, but you've got 50% of the market is privately owned. And then you've got Alberta, which is actually, it most resembles the UK environment, open, competitive, deregulation. So it was just interesting exercise myself trying to understand that and kind of compare and contrast with the UK situation. But I would say that the UK, and Europe in general is much more progressive when it comes to the adoption of like energy storage and having the rules in place that enable the use of these newer technologies. We've got a little bit of catching up to do.
Yeah. Well, I remember Germany was kind of fragmented as well, but I think it changed some probably in the middle of the 90s or so. It's not as Canada, but also fairly regionalized, but they opened up the grid, so to say. So it's a little bit different and probably easier. But I remember that.
What I can say is that the pubs in Edinburgh are top notch. So I did enjoy that part of the trip.
Yeah, and I don't know, Tyler, Mars is doing a lot in terms of clean tech procurement as well. There was the webinar at, I believe, Mars Impact Week, and I don't know if you can tell more about what.
Sure. Sure. So Mars is increasingly we see procurement as a big problem that needs to be solved, and we know that there's been lots of reports put out by various groups over the years saying, this is a problem. We got to figure out how to procure technology here at home, and use the power of the government purse to do so. But there hasn't been a lot of action around it, and there's been a lot of talk within government circles about the need for this, but we've seen really little uptake. Some of the stats I can just flag one stat is that even though the federal government is the single largest purchaser of goods and services in the country, and public procurement represents 13.3% of our GDP, Canadian clean tech companies currently receive just 3.6% of their revenue from federal procurement. So there's a number of reasons for this. I'm kind of stealing my thunder because this is going to be part of my intro with the minister, but part of the reason for this is just because, and it's not just an Ontario thing, across the board, it's hard to navigate government. There's risk aversion within the departmental procurement. The people there are obviously not going to stick their neck out for new solutions that might be commercial, but don't have the same kind of track record as something being offered by a multinational that's been around for 50 to 100 years. There's also a big problem is that RFPs are written with too much precision and they're too prescriptive. They eliminate often new approaches, new technologies, and they're worded to basically reinforce the use of technologies we've always used, or approaches. So we need to really learn how to write those opportunities and embed them into the RFP process so that we're catching, we're looking for outcomes. We're looking on solving outcomes rather than saying in advance what we know we want, because we obviously don't know what we don't know. And by being too prescriptive, we're potentially losing out on some great technologies and opportunities. So there was a question on the Q&A. I don't know if the minister's not here yet.
Yeah, not here yet. So maybe you'll do that because I'm just getting a text as well. So maybe there's some issues. So let you
sure.
The question.
So my work at Mars, that there's a question asked on the chat to talk about a little bit about my work. So we work with 240 to 250 companies across Canada at various stages of development in clean tech. We're not just focused on clean tech. We work across all different innovation categories. And in fact, Mars, we have relationships and work with over 1,400 companies across Canada. But my role is just focused on clean tech. And these are companies that are usually, if you kind of define them by funding stage, they're like pre-seed to Series B, Series C in size, combination of hardware and software companies. So we're like an accelerator, but we do more. So we provide various supports such as advisory, mentorship, access to market intelligence. We can help companies with their talent recruitment needs. We have a variety of different programs that connect up our ventures to investors, potential corporate partners, and customers. So we're quite busy these days. There's lots of things going on. One program that Mike mentioned is Mission for Mars, where we're trying to really build traction and momentum around 10 companies in Canada that have very high potential climate solutions. And we also run the Women in Clean Tech Accelerator Program, trying to get more diversity in clean tech and support women-founded, women-run businesses in clean tech, because it's sorely lacking. And as we know, diversity is an important thing. We learn lots of different new approaches and perspectives that can benefit us overall. So we're really enjoying work in that space.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite programs.
Yeah, and it's been hugely successful. Yeah, we've got some great companies that have spun out of that.
Yeah, and we need to talk about that maybe, Tyler, because I just learned that there's a female founders delegation coming in from Switzerland. Tech in general, but a few clean tech ventures as well. So maybe, yeah.
Opportunities to connect on that, yeah.
To connect, and it's always good to do an international reach out as well. So yeah, maybe. Okay, so let's see what's happening. Okay, I'm just getting a message saying that the minister had an emergency and may join in the next 10 minutes, but not guaranteed. Okay, I don't have a plan C here.
I love the certainty of that message.
So anyway, well, I think we'll just keep talking about procurement. Maybe we should patch Peter in and kind of shed some light on that while we're waiting.
Yeah, well, I'd be happy to talk about some opportunities that we're pursuing around procurement, and what I mentioned before is that there's a lot of groups talking about this and trying to do work in this area, but I think what's really needed is that a lot of like-minded organizations to come together and pool resources and to kind of work towards the same goal versus trying to reinvent things on their own. So Mars is kind of hoping to play that convening role over the next year. We're calling it a net zero mission, so around procurement, where key players, SDTC, Circular Innovation Council, Smart Prosperity Institute, and other organizations that are kind of have their eye on this, including OCTIA, bringing them together and trying to define what are some projects we can start working on today that would start to build momentum around this. A great example that exists in the healthcare area is the Can Health Network, where a bunch of hospitals got together to figure out what they need and what are some of the shared procurement needs that they have, and then to build a structure that allows them to assess new technologies in the health and medical space, and then do if one of them does a pilot project, they share learnings, and then if it meets the need of a number of the members, then they'll do joint procurement, so bulk procurement. So trying to do something similar like that for clean tech would be very important. So we're looking at this idea of putting together a buy clean innovation marketplace focused on Canadian clean tech that would be loosely modeled on the Can Health Network system. But in addition to that, the idea of an adoption ready certification program. So a lot of the ventures we work with really don't understand where they need to be to get traction with government and to break out from what we call, or I like to call, pilot purgatory, just like pilot project after pilot project after pilot project, but they never really get anywhere. So we're trying to figure out, like, how can we put together this adoption ready certification program where they get a stamp of approval and say, like, they've been through this, they've checked all the boxes, and we're confident that if government engage these companies, they wouldn't be a kind of a fly-by-night, take your bet, Hail Mary, that these are stable companies that have revenue and have met all the requirements of what they're looking for. So we're working towards that. It's a heavy lift. It's probably a multi-year program, but more on that as things progress.
Yeah, and we patched in Peter, and we great at improvising. It's maybe good that he's here as well. Peter is the chair of the Ontario Clean Technology Industry Association and RBC's Cleantech lead in his day job, as he likes to say, for those of you who don't know him. And so Peter was very involved in conversations about procurement, was on your panel, Tyler. And also, I know, Peter, you are a big fan of the Can Health model, where you form Bias Group. Now, maybe you can say a few words about that. I know you can jump right in, so I just put you on the spot.
No problem. Glad to join in. And
better you than me, Peter.
When we talk to clean tech companies, there's two key issues: access to capital, access to customers. This is the hot button issue. And Tyler's got that hot button issue today for our week in the park. I do think the Can Health Network is a really interesting model. It's taking organizations that have capital allocated to serve or deal with specific issues. So there's capital available, and matching them to companies that have technologies that could solve those problems, but not just sort of throwing that together in the mash and seeing what happens. Because in clean tech, it's so often that procurement goes to the proven established company. What's that saying? You're never going to get fired by buying from IBM. Like so the incumbents have all this advantage, and we live risk adverse society. People aren't wanting to take on undue risks, which sometimes new technologies represent. So how do you overcome that? So the incumbent technologies, which may not be as innovative, may not have the same carbon benefit or environmental footprints, get adopted. And what I love about this Can Health Network, and I don't think it's perfect, but what it does do is it allows those early stage technology companies to meet with the purchasers before they're actually doing an RFP and talk about, what are your needs? Here are our solutions. Would this work? What about a small trial? A little trial, and we'll see if this might work with your needs, or do we need to pivot, which is constantly the need in the technology sector, to pivot, to tweak, to adhere to client needs. So I think there's a lot to be learned from that model. And I'm very excited about what Tyler's talking about doing at Mars, because I think that could really help unlock the genie in the bottle. And so before I quiet down for a second, I don't want to grab the mic for too long. I would point out that I think it's 80% of procurement in Canada ultimately comes through individual municipalities. So, and there's a challenge and a half, because I don't actually know the number of municipalities in Ontario, but let's say there's 350. I mean, someone can correct me, but there are hundreds of municipalities in Ontario, and each one has its own procurement process. And so how do those municipalities undertake taking on these new technologies and bringing them on? Because there's a lot of desire amongst our communities. I'll name but one. We talked about Peterborough earlier, great water technologies there, but Guelph has got a real environmental bent, and many other communities in Ontario. How do they take on some of those risks without putting their residents in peril or potentially wasting hard-earned taxpayer money, but still deploy technologies that can help us reduce our footprint. So that's maybe more than you asked for, Micah, but anyway.
Yeah, I'm just quickly, Peter. So what the buyer group does in essence is it de-risks the investment, right? Because it spreads the risk basically. And so the question, so I'm wondering, couldn't municipalities, if they had a similar procurement process or some guidelines, couldn't they do the same?
It would. So the idea is that you can work with a new technology and the purchaser before implementing a $10 million RFP, before, for argument's sake, procuring a lot of electric buses.
Yeah.
And try it with an example and in test basis, see if it meets the needs. So if that happened through the Mars Tech Network, sorry, Tyler, I missed the acronym, but through the Mars program, maybe there will be a vetted or tested technology that will be available to Guelph, Peterborough, Thunder Bay, Ottawa, that will have some vetting and reduce some of that risk. Is that
it just overcomes that risk aversion. Yeah, and we're doing, actually, we have a project underway right now. A lot of people didn't catch this, but just before the holiday break, the City of Toronto announced that their council had approved them to work with us directly with our 10 mission for Mars companies to sole source for pilot projects, with the goal of identifying where we can do pilot projects, but more importantly, how to design the contract around those projects so that various milestones were defined well in advance, and that if the company hit those milestones, there would be an on-ramp to follow-on purchases without the need to go to a separate RFP. So that's hugely beneficial for the companies, because then you break out of this pilot purgatory kind of cycle. And our hope is, as we get through this work with the City of Toronto, we can then kind of develop a playbook, a procurement playbook for large municipalities. Could be shared with Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary, etc. And that model could be replicated. Now, the thing that's good about the Can Health approach is I think it's more ideal for smaller municipalities, because they don't have the resources, the sophisticated, and I use that term loosely, procurement departments. Many of them don't have like people who do this, right? So it's harder for them to learn about these new technologies and get in front of them, and it's harder for them to stick their neck out and do things. So when they're working together, sharing knowledge, when they get, as you mentioned, get access to these companies in advance, learn about them, like there's so much of an opportunity to do like reverse trade shows and to really bring together these municipalities and put companies in front of them early. And then, as you say, start curating and then vetting the companies so that they have more confidence in adopting, and then they could purchase together as a buying group as well eventually, once we've kind of reached that threshold of acceptance.
One of the places that there has been some efforts in this regard is with water, and there are huge water needs in Canada, but the water community, water network in Canada has some combined buying power, and obviously there's huge First Nation needs on the waterfront, and that includes the province of Ontario for sure. And I just, again, you can't get water wrong. Like it can't not be clean. You can't put people in harm's way from a health perspective, and nor can you put on the effluent side, the downstream at risk with water. But I would like to think that we can find ways to better adapt. There's some very innovative technologies coming out of labs across Canada and Ontario, but more effectively to deploy those technologies and get them adopted. And do you think it'll work on on something as fundamental as water, Tyler?
Yeah, and I think that's important. Like, you're not going to solve every category. Like, Cleantech's very broad, right? It covers a lot of different technologies, right? So to start out, you really have to pick. You have to do a thorough kind of survey of what municipalities are looking for and try to identify common areas where they would look for the same technologies. And those would kind of be the anchor for the beginnings of this kind of marketplace. And then you can expand from there. Like this is this is a multi-year, multi-million-dollar kind of effort, right? But if you can identify the first few technology categories and start with that, and then you invite the most progressive municipalities and maybe provinces and bring the federal government to the table as well. You can start with that, and then once you kind of get comfortable with the process, then expand it out to others. It's got to be an organic process, but I think the opportunity of bringing all these things together, it's not just about a marketplace. It's actually also about a place where all of the policies can be like a one-stop shop, like a portal, right? All the policies, events related to procurement around clean tech, just kind of make it an information central so that everybody's learning from the same page, and then also take best practices from other sectors such as healthcare and incorporate them. There's going to be some subtle differences, but I think there's lots of lessons learned that we can start adopting based on today.
Yeah, based on the conversations I had, the education piece seems to be a very important one. Just also to really understand and know what technologies are out there and may help with a certain issue. Or I think.
But the other thing, if you look at the federal level, a lot of people have heard of this Innovation Solutions Canada program, where they put out challenges and different departments can ask for certain solutions to solve certain problems. And that's great and all, but there's no handover of learning from those contracts, right? Like, it just becomes a one-off project. There's nothing that's publicly shared with other government, with other federal departments, with other levels of government to say, look, we've done this. It did what we wanted it to do. Yay. You can have confidence in this. So again, a lot of the programs are just designed about these one-offs, but our companies need more than one-offs. They need to have a regular pattern of adoption. Otherwise, it's just going to be, that cycle, spinning their wheels.
Yeah, and maybe Peter, so maybe I can switch over to you. What are your thoughts? So how could OCTIA support this whole procurement topic? I mean, we're doing showcases already with potential adopters. Do you see any way, maybe through advocacy, to kind of accelerate public procurement?
I might make it even broader than that, Micah. That I think the province of Ontario it's the industrial heart of Canada, and I think the province of Ontario has an opportunity to take a leadership role in terms of decarbonizing the industrial sector. We've got the three major steel plants in Canada are in this province. Many of the major I think the major cement facilities in Canada are in Ontario, if not elsewhere. We've got huge mining and forestry sectors, and can there be leadership through the province to help those sectors to decarbonize, to collate around projects, effective procurement, sharing some of this knowledge that Tyler is talking about solutions that are working. Alberta has had lots of challenges thinking about how does it decarbonize the oil and gas sector. Well, in Ontario, we've got this industrial sector, and Alberta's done some good things. Carbon X Prize was a very good initiative, brought some great technologies, and there are a few Canadian winners out of that. The CRIN, Canadian Resource Innovation Network, Micah, you'll know that.
That's right. Yeah.
CRIN What a great establishment to try to bring technologies into that sector from outside, to give them showcasing, to give them connectivity to the industries, so that they can bring those technologies, do some of the curation that Tyler is talking about here. And can the province, can our, you know, this is a week at the park, but can the province of Ontario take leadership here and help us to do this better and make it a marquee thing? I know we've heard the current government talk about, you know, green, the cleanest steel in the world. You know, can we try to make the cleanest manufacturing sector in the world, or at least North America, which is our key marketplace?
Mining is another example I'll just point out as well. So Mars is a governing partner with a new organization called the Mining Innovation Commercialization Accelerator, called MICA. Sounds familiar?
Good name.
And it's led by the Center for Excellence in Mining Innovation in Sudbury. And the whole point of the existence of this program is to help to commercialize clean tech and other sustainable technologies within the mining sector. One thing I'll point out, though, is, and this is something that's really key, is that there's two policy objectives, whether you're talking about a particular sector or a particular level of government. One is emission reductions, right? Policies in place, you got to reduce emissions. Strategic Innovation Fund in Canada is meant to support that. And then there's the other one, which is the economic development part of it. I find that the two are often pursuing different paths, because the design of programs, while they're achieving emission reductions, they don't necessarily help Canadian innovators. They either are biased in favor of large multinationals or even like other companies outside of Canada. And the ones that, like the Strategic Innovation Fund at a federal level, is more or less abandoned a lot of the early innovation stuff, right? It's focusing on these big $1 billion plus or $500 million plus projects where the SMEs in clean tech can't really play. So this is problematic, because we understand that you want to get the biggest bang for the buck and reduce emissions, because there's these ambitious net zero targets, but we can't lose sight of the fact that we have to enable the Canadian innovators, which are going to be the engine of the 21st century economy.
Yeah, that's right. Jobs here in Canada preferred, of course. Yeah,
that, like, it's not really that helpful to just reduce emissions in Canada, but in doing so create jobs in other countries and help their GDP.
And not just because, you know, a bias towards SMEs, which are clearly, you know, key component of OCTIA's membership, but OCTIA encompasses all companies. The solutions to meet net zero, sure, we've got a variety of solutions, and maybe heat pumps are a big part of it, but to really reach net zero, we need some new solutions. And those are ones that are coming out of labs at the like of U of T, McMaster, and other universities in Ontario. And we need to help nurture those earlier stage technologies. And then the entrepreneurs that have come with those might not have $100 million in revenue today, but they might have 3.
Yeah, I mean,
or 5 million.
We have all the ingredients. We have stellar universities, researchers. We rank 4th on the global clean tech, well, not Ontario, Canada, that does on the global clean tech innovation index. Yeah, we need to take advantage of that. That's, I think, an important message here. So I don't know, so we've gotten an update, and the minister will unfortunately not be able to join us. We will, of course, make sure that we will continue talking about these important topics with different members of the Ontario government. And hopefully we can have a conversation, a webinar with Minister Romano at some point. I would say it is now at 2:57, and we have another fireside chat lined up with MPP Lucie Collard. And I would say we'll wrap it up here. I will keep everyone posted. Maybe it is possible to have another event. We'll see. And if not, we'll maybe behind the scenes we'll be able to have a conversation and really talk about procurement and shape awareness for the importance of public procurement for the clean tech sector. Tyler, Peter, thank you so much for improvising with me and for jumping in. Really sorry.
This was easy. This is what Peter and I talk about when we just have lunch and coffee together.
That's right. That's right.
just other people listening in.
Very true.
Yeah.
Anyway.
All right.
Mike, always glad to talk about procurement and clean tech.
That's
and
right.
I'll see you in a second at Lucie Collard's presentation where I'll be interviewing
Right.
her.
And again, sorry to the audience, and thank you for staying with us. I hope you still get something out of this conversation, and yeah, we'll keep you posted. Thanks, everyone. See you hopefully
Thanks, everyone.
at the next fireside chat.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.